have written, all of you already. Today I'm going to talk about this paper, which is about immigrants and school achievement levels in Italy. And I'm stepping in for Kalyan Kumar, who is a PhD student at the University of Bath. And I have to stress that this is work in progress. We are very much looking forward to hear some opinions or ideas about how to interpret the data in the context of Italy, particularly. Well, just let me start. I just divided the presentation in 4 parts: the introduction, methods, results, and discussion and conclusions. So about the introduction, who might have the lowest achievement levels in secondary schools in Italy? And we have first-generation immigrants, second-generation immigrants, third-plus generation, both born in Italy. So first-generation immigrants are not born in Italy, not the student, not the parents, no one in the family is born in Italy. Second-generation immigrants are born in Italy, but the parents are at least one of the parents is born somewhere else. And the third-plus generation, which I have been told is the inclusive way of saying the locals. Third plus, because at some point we all are immigrants everywhere. So third plus generation immigrants, both the parents and the students were born in the country. And what we found is, we can ask who do you think, there's lots of research on that, no? About immigrations and the performance in different education systems. The analysis, this has been changing over the years, and now with the latest round of PISA, I will come to that in a minute, we found no significant difference across the groups in Italy. But what could be the case among Anglophone countries like the US, Australia, New Zealand, or the UK? What do you think? Is it similar or is it different?
Similar.
Well, in the UK and the Anglophone countries in general, it is different. You have differences among the groups. In the case of Italy, you don't. Let me go more into this. Why is this important? Education impacts later outcomes in life. No? Education has to do not only with education per se, but it also has to do with employment, earning, crime, health, etc., with a range of social outcomes. It's also a source of inequality. Immigration patterns have created inequalities in different societies across the globe. So it's important to look at what are the patterns and what's going on. It's also important for an early identification of vulnerable groups, and it's crucial for not only for education again, also for economic ramifications and political polarizations. It's important to design interventions, affirmative actions, skill training, support programs, etc. And of course, to enable comparison with other countries and adapt or export policy designs. About the questions, we had a few questions. The first one is, what are the trends in achievement levels for immigrants, first and second generation, compared to the third plus generation in Italy? The difference persists after controlling for various background and school characteristics, and if the likelihood of performance is altered by the percentage of immigrants or school diversity or other aspects. So what can play a role in this area? No? We were particularly interested in the proportion of immigrants in the school. And then, does the immigrant impact or does the immigrant effect differ across the schools? We also got the question whether the effect of an immigrant differs for low-performing and high-performing schools. And okay, how does this trend compare to the Anglophone countries, the UK and USA, but also similar in New Zealand and Australia? What can potentially explain those trends? As you know, these large-scale assessments are very good to identify patterns, but are not so good to explain the mechanisms underlying those patterns. So, but we have some hypotheses that may help explain. Regarding the methods, we used data from PISA 2018, 542 schools in the sample, 22 15-year-old students on average are randomly chosen from each school. So in Italy, on average, there were 22 students per school. That gave us 11,700, almost 12,000 students in the Italian sample. We have data on background characteristics, assessed in math, and also we have assessment data for mathematics, reading, and science. The sample is representative and the findings are generalizable to the country. And we did multi-level analysis with random intercepts and random slope models to test this hypothesis. And level 1 we have students, and level 2 we have schools. This is the equation that we are using. I think the only thing to point out here is that we decided to use as outcome variable not the row or the score of mathematics, reading, science, but the binary variable, whether the students, what is the likelihood of the students to be above or below the median score within Italy. And then the other parts of the equation, we have immigration status, first, second generation, or third plus generation. We have some controls at the individual level. We have gender, SES, grade, and region. And the school level, we have urban, private, average SES, diversity, and immigrant proportion. So the proportion of immigrants in the school. And well, that's pretty much it. The sample, this is the sample that we have in comparison to UK, USA, and Australia. For the third plus generation, this is the biggest group, 87% of the sample is in this category. 4% is the second generation, 4% roughly is in the first generation, and we have almost 4% of missing data. This is just to compare the sample sizes, and of course the statistical power is not great because they are small groups, but this is what we have at the moment. We tested for the significance of the missing values, and the results were robust. The missing values, which is relatively a big group. So about the results, the first thing that we did was the composition of the variance. And there is high clustering effects observed in Italy when we compare to UK or USA. So these effects are stronger in Italy than in the Anglophone countries. Well, for the mathematics is 35%, for reading is 34%, and for science 32%. So quite standard, consistent across the different subjects. Now, if we look at the random intercept models, we have 3 models for each of the outcomes. We have a model without the student characteristics, then we have another one with the student characteristics, and then we have another one with both the student and the school characteristics. This is just to see whether this changes or not. If you pay attention to the numbers in red, these numbers in red are the coefficients of the full model. And as we can see, there is a negative effect of being an immigrant for both second generation and first generation, and then we have another row with the p-value, which is a wall test to see whether there are differences between the coefficient of first generation and second generation. We see no significant differences. This is what I was saying before. No? In contrast, we're not discussing in detail now the results of the UK and the USA, but in the UK and the USA you have a difference between first and second generation. But in this case, it's negative in both cases, and it's quite similar. For the random slope models, well, this is actually cross-level interactions that we have the correlation between second generation and the intercept, which is another way of saying a random slope model. And we have significant effects here for maths, reading, and science, and also for the correlation between the first generation immigration and the intercept. We also have negative and significant coefficients for maths, reading, and science. Now, another thing that we wanted to know, as you remember in the question, was whether there is an interaction between the language spoken at home and immigration status. We thought it was interesting to check. So, for example, in math, we have the 3 models for each outcome again. But if we go in detail into all the models, but if we look at the third model, the numbers in red again, we can see that there are no significant effects, for example, for being second-generation immigrant and speaking other language, not speaking Italian at home. There is no significant effect. And for first-generation immigrants, there is no significant effect. There is a slight, very small but significant effect for first generation and not speaking Italian at home for reading, which makes sense if we think about mathematics and science are less dependent on language. Then about the discussion. The tables are not very friendly to read, but this is a summary of the findings. And what we found here is for immigrants, both first and second generation, there are 5 to 11 percentage points less likely to score above the median in all the subjects. So for all immigrants, it's between 5 and 11%. They are between 5 and 11% less likely to score above the median, to score high, let's say. There is no significant, but there is no significant differences in the performance between first and second generation. So they are, let's say, equally negative or equally less likely to achieve high. These differences are found to be persistent after controlling for a number of student and school characteristics. So the effect doesn't shows away with when we include the controls, not the individual, not the school level controls. And the other thing is the school diversity or the proportion of immigrants studying at a certain school does not seem to influence the outcomes. And the immigrant effect significantly decreases as we move towards high-performing schools. So that means that the negative effect of being an immigrant is less strong in high-performing schools. And we can discuss that, but that also kind of makes sense, no? When you are, because when the schools perform high, also the socioeconomic conditions of the people attending the school tend to be different, and also the effect of the peer effects, no? Having been surrounded by other students who achieve well or have higher achievement levels also influences everyone in the school. The third plus generation has the highest likelihood of achieving high, which, as I was saying, is the opposite to what is observed in the UK and the USA. There are no heterogeneous effects observed, no for gender. I mean, there's no association with the outcome with gender, region, percentage of immigrants, in school, diversity, etc. The students who do not speak Italian at home are found to score lower in language and science, but not in math. This is what we saw in the tables. And then these results also provide some evidence that to falsify the immigrant optimism theory. The immigrant optimism theory indicates that immigrant groups may hold particularly optimistic beliefs about prospects for education success and school socioeconomic advancement. This is a theory that applies in other contexts, but it does not apply in the case of Italy. It's very famous, some groups of immigrants in the UK, in the US particularly, but also in Australia and New Zealand. They tend to achieve very high, especially people coming from Asia. They tend to excel in the education system, and there's a theory that tries to explain why this is the case, but that doesn't apply in the case of Italy. We can discuss why, but I think that there's some reasons. What are the reasons for that? And here is what I would very much like to have some input from your side, because we are a bit lost in the trying to find theories or hypotheses to explain why this is the case. Because I at risk of talking about things that I don't know deeply, we can have some hypotheses, no? that have to do probably with the type of immigration that you have in the different countries. And also there we have migration came like mainly in two waves in the world. No? The second generation immigrants migrated between 1962 and 2002. This is according to the age of the students. And first generation immigrants, they immigrated to the country between 2003 and 2018. So this is the two waves that you have, or how can you split the first and second generation, and we can try to relate that to things that happen in the world, to explain what is the profile of the immigrants in different countries at different points in time for first and second generation. And that may have to do with people moving because they want to move, and people moving because they have to move. It can be because of ethnic conflicts and wars, natural disasters, etc. And that plays a role, could contribute to expand this theory of the optimistic theory for immigrants in the education system. So, depending on those factors, we can also speculate what is the nature of the immigrants. Do they have low human capital, or are they coming? What kind of immigrants we are having? And also, of course, the policies of the immigration policies in different countries that have also changed in time. I know much more about the UK or the US, but in Italy, it might also be the case that the immigration policies have changed. Are we, or is Italy welcoming immigrants? What kind of immigrants are they selecting? It's very known the case in Canada, no? But the UK as well. They have these programs that you can get a visa if you're highly skilled, and then they are receiving people with highly skilled, high human capital, and they bring their children with them. So this is also that we could look into. And well, on the downside, why they are not performing well is probably because they are struggling to assimilate, to identify themselves, or probably because of different kinds of traumas that they might bring with them. The fact that students who speak, this is only for reading, but the immigrants who speak Italian at home do better. The immigrants, but they speak Italian at home. That might be an indicator, but again, it's a very broad indicator, that they may want to be more willing to assimilate, to blend in the country. No? I as an immigrant myself, for example, we don't speak English at home, no? But I know families that do that, no? Especially, and that varies also from where they come from. I remember in Germany, I was an immigrant in Germany as well. Polish families, they speak German at home mostly, and that's but this is Polish families. Latin American families tend to speak Spanish, but there's all this kind of fine-grained research that can be done probably mainly qualitatively to try to explain those factors. No? So unlike other Anglophone countries, in Italy, both immigrant groups are significantly less likely to achieve higher competency levels. And then that suggests an urgent need to focus on immigrant groups to tackle the growing gap, and the need for educational interventions for vulnerable youth, especially in low-performing schools. And well, also educational policies such as skill development are needed to support targeted groups to avoid further social cleavages. I don't like the word. I Google it and don't Google it. I was not sure what it was. That's Kalyan. Thank you very much.